Hello, three people watching. I wonder if it's even worth pointing this out, but, well, I'll just quickly go through a few things if it really needs to be pointed out, because, on the one hand, something is obvious, and then you are told that it's not really obvious until it's pointed out. So, I'm saying that any adult of full legal capacity should be able to have a discussion about what is true, what is reasonable, and what is moral. This is really the least you can do as a human being, because it is this ability to understand abstract concepts such as truth, logic, and morality that make us higher in status than non-human animals. You can imagine animals talking about being hungry or what they saw, but you won't. You just can't imagine them having a philosophical discussion, can you? This is really only what humans do. So, I think this is a minimum standard for us to go by. Now, obviously the truth is controversial, in that what you say will be contradicted by somebody else who says it isn't, and what you think is logical will be contradicted by somebody who might say it's invalid or unsound. And of course we should, at the very least, understand what these concepts are. And this is helpful because it allows us to understand the nature of arguments. So, it's a very good way of finding out if somebody actually knows what an argument was about. So they can say, yeah, A and B were having an argument and I listened to them and I thought A won because what he said was sounder than what the other said. It really is as simple as that, and I'm afraid Jen doesn't really know this, does she? Church of Entropy. I think she might have learned by now, but she's still denying the existence of these ideas, and indeed saying that it doesn't really matter, and some other system of logic is more important. Unfortunately, these discussions that Church of Entropy and I have been having were private, so I can't really demonstrate to you the poverty of her arguments, except that it served a kind of perhaps therapeutic purpose for her, in that some people just want to hear the sound of their own voice. They want to hear the sound of them saying the same thing again and again. I mean, I guess that's what, prayers and mantras are for. Mantras are words that we say to each other. To say to ourselves to, calm ourselves. Sometimes we know the meaning of these words, and sometimes we don't. No, I'm not going to tell you my my Chinese name, because then you'll go, huh? How do you spell that? And then you'll forget, and then you'll ask me again. So what's a mantra? It's a statement or slogan repeated frequently, or a word or sound repeated to aid concentration and meditation. So it's a meaningless word. So I guess when some people like to engage with me and then go through this, the same old merry-go-round, it is probably for their own purposes. So they think by refusing to accept the soundness of my argument and hearing themselves say what they always say, they are in some way protecting themselves against the power of my arguments. And this, I believe, must be the reason why certain people whose names shall be... Well, actually, a few people do that. That's a kind of habit. Well, I often wonder why they do that. It's like, well, we're just going to, get to a certain point, and then you'll say the thing that you usually say. And, it's like some tired rehearsal of some sword fighting that you've rehearsed to, show off to other people or something. And I've often wondered, why people do that. And I think I've just worked it out today. By hearing themselves say the same thing again and again, they can convince themselves of the validity of it, if not the soundness. I can tell you that my Chinese name means honourable and wise. Now, back to my original topic, which is why human beings should at least aspire to having the ability to discuss truth, logic, and morality without going against it. Is that too much to ask? Apparently so. But that really is the minimum. Are the people around me capable of doing that? Do they even think it's their kind of human obligation to be able to discuss these things honestly and honourably? Probably not. They probably think the name of the game is to win the argument or never admit that you're wrong. So obviously a different kind of moral education is required for, well, a whole bunch of people who think it's acceptable to lie or rely on irrational arguments and immoral principles and then refuse to discuss them. Unfortunately, these people are in positions of influence in government, and the people below who object to being governed by such corrupt and irrational and immoral and dishonest people are themselves hopelessly dishonest, irrational, and corrupt. What is to be done? Repentance is an option, but then if you're unable to admit your mistakes, then you're not going to. I'm reminded of Christ, who said, the truth will save you. Of course it will save you. It will save you from error and disaster. It was even Christ who said it, wasn't it? So, it was actually O.V. who said it. He said, truth is not about winning or losing. And I was reminded of Rabbi Sachs, who said something similar in one of his sermons, and it was to the effect of, well, if you argue for the sake of truth, then whoever wins, then nobody loses. So obviously the one who took the correct position wins, but the one who took the opposite position also wins because his error is corrected. But obviously if you're like certain people that I'm always having to deal with, then they will never be corrected, and there will never be rescued from their error and their lies and their delusions. So this comes from John 8:32. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Yes, the truth of the matter is that I have to deal with people all around me who are more invested in pretending that they did nothing wrong. So this is the nature of my undertaking. But at least it's on record that I tried. I tried to point out the truth. It was ignored by the government, who should know better, but also ignored by the people complaining about being misgoverned. So what is the truth? I want people like the archetypes of Western man and woman to admit. Obviously, I want them to acknowledge truth, logic, and morality. Jay, well, it's very difficult to understand what Jay's state of mind is, because he might even agree with me for a while and then change his mind. So in this way he is as capricious as a woman and as changeable as the weather vane. But that is, of course, really the problem. It's a problem of not living in a theocracy. Because if we lived in a theocracy, we would know what the laws are and they wouldn't change from year to year. And parliament to parliament, they would just stay the same. The rate of taxation would stay the same. The way government chooses to tax us would stay the same. And life would become more predictable, and this includes crime and punishment. It might even improve. But because Jay is the way he is, he will allow his emotions to become more important than whatever capacity for reason he has, which was not much to begin with, because he's not an educated man, and people who are not well educated are careless about the meaning of words and don't care if they use them correctly or not. People like that tend to make category errors, and then of course I find myself having to explain what a category error is. A category error is confusing something with another because they are quite similar, but they are not quite the same. And then, when you point it out to them, they'll say, "I don't care. You can't make me change. It's not your business. Go away." Stuff like that. Well, of course, an educated person would be mortified, and even if he hated you for saying that, he would, he might look up all kinds of references to prove that he was right, and at least you can have an argument with him about it. But for someone uneducated, they'll say, "Well, I don't care. You can't make me change the way I use words. Who the hell are you?" So these people are very hard to change, and as you already know, nobody listens to them. So because they know nobody listens to them, they'll think, well, it doesn't matter what I say. Nobody cares except me. And this is, of course, a problem of the alt-right. It's when we think nobody's looking, so we just do what we like. So perhaps it might be useful as a way of lifting us morally to put a policeman in our head in which we could have a kind of conscience. So we think, well, maybe there's nobody looking at us right now, but maybe God knows my heart and mind and knows my thoughts and will judge me accordingly. But what I find difficult is people like Jay actually says he believes in God. But when I question him further and say, well, is it the Abrahamic God? I'm not really sure of the answer. But I guess he must be, because he's talking about God, the God of the Sermon on the Mount, which is the Abrahamic God. And logically I ask him, well, if you believe that God created you, then you have to believe that he also made laws for you to obey. And that goes beyond him, and he doesn't want to think about it much. But, that's the whole narrative of the Abrahamic God, you see, because you logically have to believe, if you want to accept the existence of God, then you have to accept that he created the universe, made laws for Jews and Gentiles, but Jay doesn't want to believe in that, so he just says, well, I don't believe in that bit. I don't believe he made laws. I don't believe I need to follow them. And then you might go on to ask him, well, which laws do you obey? And then he'll say Sermon on the Mount. And Sermon on the Mount has no laws. It's just a bunch of silly stories that make no sense. But what is the attraction of Sermon on the Mount? It's attractive because it could mean anything. It's so vague that it can mean anything you like. So you superimpose your own beliefs on it, and then you wrap it up in the package of Sermon on the Mount, and then you give it the power of Christianity, and therefore its respectability. So that's why people use religion to raise their status, raise the status of their beliefs and views, and they'll say, well, God says so, or God agrees with me, and then of course you have to go to the laws, and then that's when he loses interest and he goes away. Other people are like that. But they've been allowed to get away with it, and some of them are no longer that young. But old habits die hard. So I think you're all basically aware of what is truth and what is lies, and what is rational and what is irrational. But what is moral? I'd like to discuss that with Jen, but I doubt that she will discuss it with me. She wants a formal debate. But why? Why have a formal debate? It's very hard to follow, because what you have is I'm going to read out to you this the rules for this debating society that I used to go to until I was blackballed. Well, they do things in the old-fashioned way. All that referring to the other person in the third person, and saying things like, the honourable member of this society, and it's a kind of way of introducing people to political parliamentary debate. It even says the structure of the debate has remained largely unchanged. It's a Victorian debating society too. It is formal in style. All remarks are addressed to the chair rather than to those holding opposing views. This avoids any sense of personal animosity. So, it's like members of the parliament addressing the speaker and talking about, the right honourable member or whatever. So it's called all speakers in the floor debate. And people watching the debate can later, after the debate is over, say a few things. But this makes it formal, and then you'll have a form of debate. So the words will be something like, Queen Elizabeth should be our last monarch. Or, whatever, is or should, either is okay. I've always preferred the should something be done rather than is something, the case. So, really, my proposal is that people who can't form grammatically correct sentences just wouldn't deserve to have their views heard. If they can't talk about morality, there's no reason for why listen to somebody like that? Because all such a person will be saying is, I prefer this rather than that because I like it or I hate it. It's when they can sort of go beyond the but can't you see that it's wrong? Because what you can do is, somebody can get a fact right or wrong, and then they can reason correctly or incorrectly, and then finally, within the ability of being able to distinguish truth from falsehood and sound and unsound arguments, you will have to debate whether a particular course of action is moral or not, and the assumption should be that it should always be moral, and the reason to do something should be because it's moral, and then the reason for not doing something should be because it's immoral, and then of course we have to decide on the rules of morality. So then we have to discuss, what is or isn't moral, and then we can say, well, what goes against the rules is immoral, and what is the rules is moral, and where do these rules come from? And you can just keep going and going higher and higher up, from the rules your parents set you to the school rules to the highest court in the land, and then of course, is there anyone higher than that? And eventually people get to the hypothetical supreme authority, that is the Abrahamic God, who is eternal, supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly moral. So the most moral being in existence, conceivable by us, would be the Abrahamic God who made these laws for us to follow. It would be the easiest thing to say, well, what God allows is moral, what God forbids is not. Then the atheists will say, how do we know God exists? And my answer to that is so beautifully simple. We know God exists because the concept of God exists, and we're not supposed to be able to see him anyway, because he's not a genie that appears before us. But yeah, he's made all these promises, and why do people believe in God and why and others don't? And the atheists will say, because believers are stupid and they don't have fun and they're so uncool. And I'm going to say, and Duvid actually said this yesterday, people, and I've also said that before him, so, and I'm not claiming any kind of originality. I mean, it is obvious that, if you're an atheist and you refuse to change your ways, you're saying, I'm not going to miss out on the fun that I'm going to have, fucking sluts with my slut fucking friends, because this is the only life, and if I don't do it, then I'll be missing out. And this is my belief. I believe that when we die, and nothing happens. And this was what Jay admitted after all his talk of his constant connection with God. He let slip that really he's an atheist, and therefore a nihilist, which is why he's gotten away with saying Christianity is kaput, yes, no, maybe. I believe in God, yes, no, maybe. Religion is important, yes, no, maybe. And, of course, in any morally ordered society, no one would listen to him. Because only mad people get away with it. With saying yes, no, maybe to all these important, fundamental issues of life. But anyway, we are degenerate. I live in a degenerate society. The people around me are all degenerates. They're not capable of arguing anything in good faith, honestly, or rationally. And I may be complaining about, marginalised people whom nobody listens to. But I'm afraid this is also the case for the people in charge. So we're in big trouble. But then you don't care because you think, so what? When I'm dead, I wouldn't give a shit about whoever who comes after me. Yeah, I might have children, but, well, they can look after themselves, can't they? So people like that just have no particular sense of honour, It's like, I've done the least I could. I brought them up to adulthood, What the hell are they expecting from me anyway, right? What, stick my neck out for them? Point out the truth for them? Nah, I'm just going to leave this moral sewage for them to clean up when I'm dead. Is there anyone who isn't like that? I really don't know anyone who isn't like that. No, I don't have to believe in God, I'm just telling you, if you believed in God, you would, do this. If you don't believe in God, you would do that. So, one of the things David was saying in that post-JF stream was that, atheists have problems being chaste. They regard that as stupid. And so we can deduce that atheists reject the requirement to follow God's laws because they don't want to be subject to God's laws because it's just stupid to say you believe in God and then, break all the laws. I mean, why would you go somewhere and say, yeah, I agree with all your laws, but I'm going to break them? It's just mad to do that. So if you've decided to break God's laws, then you're going to say, well, God doesn't exist. Anybody who believes in his existence is stupid. I'm not going to be stupid. I'm going to fuck sluts. But obviously, if you want to, restore the patriarchy, you want to shame sluts, then you'll have to say, well, these are the laws God set us. In order for us to right ourselves, we have to go back to those rules again. And since Christianity is kaput, we will have to find something that isn't kaput. They would just have to accept the logic of that, and also they'd have to accept that, it's not going to be much fun having to admit that you're wrong, but if it's necessary, you'll do it. But to the immature mind, the mind that's never really grown up, they will think, well, maybe I can have the best of both worlds. And this is really what the Jews are doing at the moment. And that's the reason why I want to put them on the register. Because basically, you can only be a good Jew if you're an observant Jew, right? Because it just says in the book, Torah from God given to Moses, so they got to follow it. So anything that strays away from those rules is wrong. It's immoral, according to Judaism. And while we may not care what they do, whether they break the Sabbath or whatever, eat pork, pick up sticks on Saturdays, wear mixed fibres, we can judge a Jew by, is he an observant Jew or not? And so we can, judge anyone, there's this person calling himself Christian, and does he believe in the Trinity or not? And if he says he does, we can, have some fun with him, right? How can you believe that an executed revolutionary is the co-equal of God until you realise they don't believe in it? Why do they pretend to believe in it? Because it gives them respectability. And so we have to ask ourselves, what moral system we follow and why we follow it. And moral systems are religions and also political ideologies, because I guess people who follow a revolutionary political ideology would have to, or should understand it, or know what system they're following. But in the West, do they know what moral system they're following? Do they really think they're Christian? Or do they just not think about these things at all? I suspect they don't. Or they instinctively know that it's a can of worms and they shouldn't talk about these things because it would get them into trouble. So, do we live in a liberal democracy? Are we liberal? What does it mean to be liberal? Has the meaning of liberalism shifted over the centuries? And of course it has, and when you think of the mergers of different political parties, the Liberal Party merged with the Conservative Party, you notice that people use the words interchangeably, like, David Cameron, when he was around, would talk about muscular liberalism. What about muscular conservatism? Don't know. It just sounds better to say muscular liberalism. But really he was talking about neoconservatism, and neoconservatism is American, and America is a product of liberal ideas because it used a lot of philosophers of the Enlightenment that ended with the French Revolution. So they'd be always quoting people like Burke and Locke and assume that liberty is a human right. Which of course it isn't, because liberty is really what we ought to have after all the necessary laws are in place. What are the necessary laws? Well, that's in dispute. So that's why it's necessary to have people able to follow civilized rules of discourse and be able to debate things honestly and rationally, particularly on matters of moral and politics. But it seems nobody debates it properly, because they're there to take a position. But you would have thought that having taken a position, you should be prepared to defend it. And if you can't defend it, then you would have to concede that it was morally and intellectually indefensible. But they don't, do they? They think, well, if I don't concede, then I don't have to suffer any loss of pride, and I can just carry on like this because most people won't come and fight me about it. And so this is, of course, the corruption that permeates all classes of society, really. So nobody admits their mistakes, so mistakes never get corrected, and well, I think you can see that would be a bad thing. So, might say a lot of things. I don't really get that many challenges. And I think you already know I'd like let anyone challenge me. I mean, obviously there are people who want to get on the platform and want to say their thing and hear their own voice saying the same thing again and again and again, because it's like a mantra to them. The engagement kind of sets them up for the day or something. So what I'm saying is obvious. We're better than animals, and therefore we should be able to discuss abstract concepts like morality. But I'm stuck discussing it with people who don't care about the arguments. Yeah, well, we know Jay just wants to talk shit. He hasn't got an argument because, look, what I do when I have an argument is I've already posted in the chat. Jay doesn't post it in the chat because you know what? He thinks he's won. He thinks he's won if I let him on in the Hangout so he can talk to me. That is his goal. It's not that he has any argument, and he doesn't have to have an argument. He just has to get people cheering him on. That'll do him. The people cheering him on, do they care about the arguments? Of course not. So Jay is useful in that he kind of gets the answer and then he goes away from it again. And, if you think of Western civilization, or perhaps maybe it's true of all civilizations, it's like obviously they were a great civilization once upon a time. The Romans, the Aztecs, they obviously were doing a whole bunch of things right. And then they kind of moved away from doing it because they didn't write anything down, I guess. They just thought, well, this is looking great. We don't need to. Maybe we can break a few of our rules. And if the rules were never written down, then that's very easy to do, isn't it? And if the rules are written down but not very clear, then it's also very easy to stray away from them. Of course, all these major world religions have their own scripture, but because there's just so much of it, nobody ever expects anyone to have read, all the Vedas, for example, or all the whatever you can find in Buddhism, which wasn't even written by the Buddha. It's written by people talking about the Buddha, and then you get stuff being written by Christ by people who've never met him, even for most of the books in the New Testament. And then we're faced again with Judaism, the scripture of Judaism and the scripture of Islam, where all the rules are contained for Jew and Gentile. Now, this is a truth too stark for many to handle. I mean, I do know, the style of what passes for political discourse. You'll get lots of subscribers if you complain about something, and everybody agrees with you. Isn't the lockdown stupid? Isn't, whatever. Isn't it the fault of the Jews? Isn't it because of the Muslims? Isn't it because of China? Blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. But the moment you propose a solution, you'll get into trouble. Because somebody will say, we'll have a vested interest, basically. They'll say, well, I don't want to do that because, I'm in that kind of relationship and I don't want to marry her. Well, there's any number of things that make you not want to challenge a status quo, chief of which is disapproval, risk, and of course it's not that it's not that people are dishonest. I mean, I guess sometimes they're genuinely in a dilemma. Well, if I lose my job, I'll be in so much trouble with the missus, with the mortgage, with the children. So obviously these people have to, mind their P's and Q's, and these would be people that, who have a middle class lifestyle, who have mortgages to pay off and stuff. But what about the people bumping along the bottom who, get by on benefits? You would have thought they would be more free to think, to submit to the truth, but, not a bit of it. And I suppose nobody's ever told them that their way is wrong, because I guess if you wanted to round up some recruits, you wouldn't be telling them what's wrong with them. And so, opinion would diverge, like, shall we just give them the shit they want to hear? Or shall we tell them the truth? But if we tell them the truth, they'll unsubscribe. And then they might boycott you. But that's basically the problem, the inability to agree on what morality is. Jen won't. I don't think she'll discuss it with me, do you? I mean, she has views, so, you would have thought that she'd want to discuss them. What would be the point of making it a formal debate? It would just give an opportunity to rig it and fill the panel up with her people like Rook and Duvid and Conops and people who don't like secular Quranism. So easily done. And then refuse to discuss, what's a sound argument and what's a valid argument. And then, of course, nobody would care. And some people would just say, well, it's only words. No point getting ourselves killed over it. But when people say it's only words, they mean it's only ideas. So ideas can be silly and smart or supreme, like the Abrahamic God. I mean, even if the Abrahamic God didn't exist, he still represents the most powerful entity conceivable by man. So, if you did believe in him and followed his laws, then your life would change. If a whole society followed it, then the whole society will change, and that society could be a nation, and then an empire, and then a world empire, and the world would change. That's how these things happen. And of course, if you do the opposite, then it will be, well, good or bad, depending on whether the rules make sense. But for some reason, nobody wants to talk to me about these things. I thought there were a few people who kind of seemed interested in philosophy, but I suppose it's a horror of having to change their religion that transfixes these men into neurotic suspension. I have to wait for somebody who is able to have a rational debate, and I suspect that he may already be dead, or will probably be a rabbi, it's only, or a lawyer. And I think most lawyers are like academics. They'll be too terrified of losing their job because they're both very overcrowded professions. More lawyers and positions than jobs for them, and obviously more academics than there are posts for them to fill. So that means quite a lot of them will be only too happy to prostitute their intellect in the service of whoever will pay them, usually their employer. So I hope you'll see now why your society is breaking down. Really, because of bystander apathy and people thinking words just hot air. When words are ideas, and there is a supreme idea that you have not quite made up your mind to believe or follow. Now, Stephen James mocks, but he has no arguments. So that's another problem, really. In the hierarchy of who has most moral authority, it would be somebody with an idea against somebody with no idea. then then you have two people with ideas, with an idea, with a solution, and therefore you can measure the worth of them by engaging in a rational discourse. But this can't happen in the alt-right because it's all about taking positions, because their identity is about expressing their ancestral hatreds. So that would of course mean, the Jews. And anti-Semitism doesn't really just include Jews, because Arabs are Semitic people, and Islam was first taken up by the Arabs. So you can deduce then that anti-Semitism wasn't merely a racial dislike of the Semitic peoples, but also an ideological antagonism towards people who believed in the oneness of God. And of course, anti-Semitism is actually a uniquely Christian trait. If you read the New Testament, it's all about these whited sepulchres and in their synagogue of sin. And there has been a theory that it was the Romans who created the religion of Christianity in order to spite the Jews who were giving them so much trouble. I don't think my ideas need to be written in a book. Well, it would be a waste of time to write it, and I don't think it'll change your mind if you're determined not to change it, Stephen James. But of course, it's part of your campaign of malign encouragement. So Stephen James, in theory, has the capacity to be reasoned with, but he chooses to block off that bit of him, the bit that tells him that religion is the thing that is missing in the West, and therefore it deprives Westerners of the ability to deal with their internal and external enemies. Because morality, at the very least, includes the ability to use truth and reason to reason your way around the rules. So basically you need to know what the rules are, and then you need to use your reason to live within those rules and have a reasonable existence, and that would tend to make you more intelligent than if you had no rules at all and did whatever you liked the whole time. So, Bandido, are you anybody I know? Do you want to come on? I love debating Christians, but they don't like debating with me. I think it's something to do with the fact that Christianity is morally and intellectually indefensible and very hard to believe in an age of universal education, as well as the idea that you shouldn't be forced into believing in an absurdity. So I guess you're still in denial. I mean, what are the 5 stages of grief? Denial, anger, bargaining. depression, acceptance, and you're still at the first stage. And because you have no leader that you trust, who has any kind of integrity, there's no way of expediting the debate. Because, those of you who are atomized will simply ignore truth, logic, and morality, because you don't want to be ostracized from your online community. So, while your ancestors actually had to, settle new territories, they had to undertake hazardous journeys, they had to fight wars, you can't bear the thought of being kicked out of your online community. So that's really the problem. I mean, it doesn't, any little disadvantage will be enough to frighten you into submission and silence and denial of truth, logic, and morality. Imagine an entire political community, and I mean the alt-right, and they already hate Christianity, but they can't bring themselves to discuss it. Because they don't want to take the logical next step of concluding that Christianity is kaput. But I will speak for under an hour and I'll say goodbye now. So thank you, Bandito, if I haven't... I guess you're new because I haven't seen you before. Thank you for listening.